tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. When I sort of read things in the news and the media and certain issues, I sort of compare them with the life of the Buddha and how he would relate to, certain of these issues. Maybe it's part of what we might call Buddhanusati, mindfulness of the Buddha, and how the Buddha lived and taught, and the Buddha's example to us. Now, of course, the Buddha is a very shining example and something we have to aspire towards. We can't be like Buddha straight away, but it's good to reflect on how the Buddha related to certain situations. There's been, in the media, the issues around Black Lives Matter and racism, discrimination. In England, there was a lot of things about anti-Semitism. And just reflecting really how the Buddha related to, all the different sorts of people. In the time of the Buddha, maybe he didn't have so much international travel, but of course they had the caste system. And the Buddha himself was from a higher caste. But by the way he set up the Sangha, you see, he wasn't caught into the caste system, that he didn't discriminate. Like he wouldn't just, I'm only going to give the going forth to people in the high caste. So anybody from any caste was welcome to join the Sangha. But the very radical thing the Buddha also did, that, when you joined the Sangha, you lost your status. So whatever caste, whatever wealth, colour of skin, nationality, any status, you had to let go of. And the Buddha gave the example of one of the wonderful qualities of the Sangha compared to the ocean. It's like when all the great rivers, the Ganges and all the other great rivers, enter the ocean, they lose their former name and status. They just become known as the ocean. In the same way, when one enters the Sangha, all your titles, everything are put aside, and you're just known as a monk and nun, just a plain bhikkhu. And of course, we wear the same robes, no stripes or any special paraphernalia on the robes, the same hairstyle, or should I say no hairstyle. And yeah, the sense of putting down any sort of, the willingness to be wanting to put down any conceits due to class, status, education, colour of skin. So this was a very radical thing, and Buddha got very criticized, but he was strong enough and had the ability to make this work. There's a very nice occasion in the life of the Buddha when the Sakyan princes, they all decided, 6 of them, including Venerable Venerable Anuruddha, Venerable Devadatta, there were 6 of them, decided they wanted to go forth under the Buddha. So they came out of the sort of palace, and then when it came to a certain point, they dismissed all the army. And then they took off all the paraphernalia, all the jewelry and things, and wrapped it all up, and gave it to the servant, Upali. And they said, "Okay, Upali, your service is done. These things should keep you in livelihood for a while." And then Upali, started to go away, and he realized that, people might get the wrong impression if he went back with all these things from the princes. So he thought, well, why not go forth myself? And so he went with the 6 princes to take the going forth. And the nice thing was when they approached the Buddha, I think it was a Venerable Nanda said, "Lord, please give going forth to Venerable Upali first. And then we'll have to pay respects to him, and this will humble our Sakyan pride." So that was a great willingness of the monks to let go of the pride due to status and so whatever class or status you have, when one joined the Sangha, one paid respects to the person more senior, no matter what class or status they had before. So just not to get caught into the conditioning that we might have about our nationality or class or status. You see, the Buddha didn't discriminate. So this is something to aspire towards in our own sort of minds and hearts. If we see any, we are conditioned in terms of maybe certain pride due to certain things, or conditioned to be a bit biased towards certain nationalities or religions or whatever. But just to be aware of that tendency to be in any sense of like superiority or bias, tendency to discriminate, and inclining towards like the Buddha, who had an open heart to really anybody who approached, no matter what caste or colour of skin. So this is something to aspire towards in our own practice and life, to notice any biases and developing the skill of going beyond these biases and this conditioning. But when as the Buddha became more famous, then then would people try to challenge him or criticize him, put him down? And one of the questions the Buddha once asked was if the Buddha had compassion for all sentient beings. And the Buddha affirmed he did. But then he was challenged and said, well, if you had compassion, equal compassion for all sentient beings, why do you spend more time with the monks and nuns, less time with the lay followers, and even less with the followers of other traditions? So he was challenged, And one of there were 4 ways the Buddha used to respond to questions. Sometimes he'd give just a very short, succinct sort of answer. Sometimes more long, detailed answer. Sometimes if there was, if there was nothing that he could say to help, he'd just keep noble silence. But another way the Buddha would answer a question would be by asking a question back. So the question the Buddha asked back to this person was, well, suppose you were a farmer and you had 3 fields. One field was very fertile. The other field was moderately fertile. But the last field was not very fertile at all and full of rocks and stones. And where would you plant your seeds first? And of course, the man replied, well, yeah, of course, in the fertile field. So the Buddha said, well, it's the same for me. The most fertile field are the monks and nuns, because they are very much committed towards, their whole life is committed towards the practice. And, for the lay people, limited in what they can apply to the practice. And then, other people of other traditions doing other things. So this is, also an example of, not being idealistic about compassion, but, always balancing compassion with wisdom. Because we have so much time and energy, and we have to be wise about how we use that energy. And if we're not enlightened, then we also have to spend time being compassionate for oneself in terms of one's own personal practice too. Besides our acts of skillfulness and support for others. And, and reflecting where to put the energy we have. Where is it going to be the most useful and helpful? So these are things we have to maybe reflect on. Another thing that is, sometimes quite striking when one looks at the media is, maybe more on the political front, is how politicians always talk about their own achievements and all the wonderful things they've done, and then their opponents, they dwell on all the things they've made a mess of or something, try to put them down, inflate themselves and put down their opponents. And using the speech in this way. Now this, and I like to compare this with what the Buddha called the speech of the word in Pali is sapurisa, of the superior person. Interesting to compare. So the speech of a superior person, when asked about their own achievements, they reply, downplaying what they've achieved. And even talked about their achievements, reluctantly. When pushed, they have to be pushed to talk about their achievements. But when asked about somebody else's achievements, they're very happy to talk about that and go into great detail. When they're asked about their own shortcomings, they're very happy to talk about that. And, be very open about their shortcomings. When asked to talk about somebody else's shortcomings, reluctant to talk about other people's shortcomings. So you see, quite opposite to what one sees in the media. Interesting to think about how it would be in politics if the person praised the leader of the opposite party and talked about his achievements and the good things he'd done and downplayed his own. True, probably in the world it wouldn't work, would it? On a world level. But of course, if we really follow the Buddha's teachings, this is much more skillful. This is more leading to something more wholesome in the heart and mind, isn't it? I mean, I think about, if I had to, in England I go to interfaith meetings, and sometimes I'm on panels, and there's, people from all the different religious traditions, and we say we're after a gathering of school students, and if I had to sort of, just talk about all the things I didn't like about the religions, wouldn't be very, very nice, would it? So I'm happy that I'm able to focus more on more skillful things and not always be looking for faults and shortcomings in other people, dwelling on that, blowing it up, and remembering people's goodness and achievements. This is something that has much more beneficial quality on the mind when one dwells more on these things. And I consider all the politicians, they have their things they haven't done very well, but I think for all of them they've done some things they've done well. They've not completely been everything. That's something good to bring to mind so that we don't get caught into a negative mind state towards the politicians. And, in religions too, the media tends to dwell on the extremists and more, extreme things that religious people do, but, we've got to consider the good things that people in that religion do also. Because we can get in this mindset of just looking for faults and criticism, shortcomings, what's wrong with everything. Forgetting there are some good things there. But when one considers things, if somebody was more open about their shortcomings, that would be a good leader in effect, because they would be much more receptive to feedback and maybe would ask the people around them more, for their advice. But of course, when we're just caught into ambition and promoting oneself, then one doesn't become so amenable to feedback and listen to people. So I remember when I started work as an engineer, I wasn't into any sort of Dharma practice then, and my mindset was more about getting on, achieving, getting up the ladder, getting promotion. And what that meant was, the way you related to the people you work with is more like competitors. And then not being open about the things I was finding difficult, not asking questions about the work I was doing. So I wasn't doing very well, because I wasn't being, say, humble enough to ask questions, always trying to look like I knew it. Because of this wish to get on and get promoted and not wanting to show one's shortcomings, other things that one didn't understand. Then, as time went on, I came across the Dhamma and started to practice Dhamma. And you could say through that, actually, the ambitious mind lessened, because I began to realize was, happiness wasn't depending on having money and position and promotions. Happiness, I began to sense the happiness that came through Dhamma practice. And the result of that was being much more friendly with the people I work with, not feeling so competitive. And I started to ask questions. I didn't mind about not showing that I didn't know certain things. But the interesting thing was, my work improved because I was asking questions now. And then the boss actually began to express his appreciation of my work. But because, I was willing to be open about my shortcomings and ask questions. In our discipline as monks, we have a training rule about not telling the lay folks about any gross fault of another monk, unless we have the permission of the Sangha. And this is also just that, to prevent that tendency of monks trying to look better than other monks by talking about other monks' faults. And it's quite it is a human tendency that sometimes we can be quite jealous of somebody who's more popular than us. When I was a junior monk, I was in a small vihara with one other senior monk and two anagarikas. And the senior monk I was with was a very good talker, very charismatic, and people were really in awe of him. And really good answering questions and giving talks. And there's that in the human mind that likes a bit of attention, and he got it all and you didn't get any. And it gave rise to feelings of jealousy. And then you see with those things, you start to you tend to be more critical of the person, of what he's doing, and you can see that if you weren't mindful, he'd done something gross, you might tell the lay people that to downplay him, But through the practice of being more mindful, being more aware, you're aware of these jealous feelings and the thoughts, and you don't buy into them. And you actually reflect that really good that he's able to inspire these people to practice the Dhamma, try to reflect like that, and then these feelings go. And again, the more one does practice Dhamma, when one finds one's own source of inner well-being, then the need, to get attention and things from outside lessens, because, you've cultivated it in your own heart, and less need for something from the outside, because you have a sense of well-being from your Dhamma practice, or your meditation practice. We're in the last week of this Vasa, 2020 Vasa, which finishes next Friday, Thursday, Friday. And in our monastic tradition, we finished the Vasa on the full moon by reciting what we called the Pavarana chant. And normally on the full moon and new moons, we recite all the 227 Patimokkha rules. But on the Pavarana, at the end of the Vasa, we just do the sort of preliminary announcements, and then we all make an announcement ourselves. And the announcement we make individually is, if there's anything that, the Sangha has seen, heard, or suspected that is not, where my behavior is not suitable as a monk, please tell me out of compassion. And seeing it for myself, I can make amends. So we call this Pavarana. Pavarana means invitation. Invitation can also mean, lay people make invitation to the monks sometimes. Do you need anything? It's the same word. But here, at the end of the Vasa, we make the invitation for any feedback from our fellow monks. Because, sometimes after Vasa, some monks leave the particular group, the monastery, go off to another monastery. So at the time of the Buddha too, they'd be together for the Vasa, then after Vasa, monks would go off to other places. So it's a way of just, asking for feedback before one left. And this is important in our training as monks. And the Buddha said that if we're not open to receive feedback and listen to feedback, then that's death in the holy life. So we all say this, but then, then it's not like straight away everybody starts giving feedback to each other, but, we made the invitation, then over the next days, if there's something that's feedback somebody wants to give to somebody, one can. But of course, the Buddha also gave guidelines of how to skillfully give feedback in terms of finding the suitable time and place, finding the suitable words, how to give it in a skillful way, not give it with harshness, but with a heart more to try to benefit out of compassion and kindness. So if we give feedback skillfully, maybe people are much more willing to listen. But sometimes feedback is not, can be not so pleasing. And, this also reminds me of another occasion in the life of the Buddha, where one of the other big teachers at the time of the Buddha, and again, caught into this trying to promote oneself and putting down your so-called competitors. Well, he sent one of his disciples, and the reasoning behind what the teacher said to the disciple was, ask the Buddha if he says things to people that are displeasing and unpleasant to them. Ask the Buddha. And if he said he doesn't, maybe because the idea of somebody who was a great enlightened being wouldn't say anything that would displease anybody, or cause sort of displeasure. And if he says he doesn't, then say, well, how is it, you said those not nice things about Devadatta, that he was going to go to hell for what he'd done. So, this prince, he was a prince, he went to the Buddha. First of all, he just invited him round for the meal. And so the Buddha came to the meal at the prince's house with his few of the other monks. And then Prince Abhaya, he asked the Buddha, does the Buddha ever say things that are displeasing and cause some displeasure for people? Now, the Buddha is quite, astute. And again, he used this reply. His reply was by asking the question back to the prince, using the same way of responding again. And it happened that on the prince's knee was a child. And the Buddha asked the prince, he said, now if that child, if the child's attendant wasn't there, and that child swallowed a pebble or something, got stuck in its throat, what would you do? And the prince said, well, I have sort of, pick the child up, I'd turn him upside down and hook my finger in to get it out. And the Buddha said, wouldn't that cause some displeasure for the child? And, the prince got the point. But then the Buddha did elaborate a little more. He talked about the Buddha's speech. And what the Buddha said, if he's going to say something, it has to be truthful, factual, beneficial for the person, whether it pleases them or not. But the Buddha comments that, but find the right time to say it. So sometimes one has to, give feedback that maybe people don't want to hear, but one's intention is to help them, to benefit them if they're willing to listen, they're willing to see what you're trying to say and make amends. So this is much more skillful way of doing it. Sometimes you don't see it happening like this in the soaps. When my father's alive, I used to take him to every year I'd bring him to the monastery for a few days, and then I'd take him over to visit my sister. And my sister, she knew that my father used to like the soaps. And she knew he'd be in the monastery for a few days, so she'd record them for him. And I remember, having to sit through 3 episodes of this soap just to be more sociable with my father and my sister. And all I remember is just people shouting at each other, criticizing each other, shouting at each other, trying to force people to be different than they are. And I find it a bit painful to watch. Anyway, hopefully that's just the soaps, and they always make things a bit more extreme on the soaps. But skillful use of speech is a very beautiful thing. It can do a lot of good in the world if people are willing to use their speech skillfully. But if they use their speech unskillfully, it can cause so much problem, can't it? Especially people in very influential positions, in places of power. Yeah. So it's a powerful tool, isn't it? So these are the sort of things that one tries to practice. One doesn't always, not always successful, but one always can reflect and begin again. But these skillful things that we can aspire towards, and the Buddha's example, and the things I've talked about tonight about the Buddha not discriminating between people. And about how, about skillful use of speech. That, not only can promote more good things on the outside, but also just promote the quality of our own heart and mind when we can, use our speech more skillfully. Especially, I said, focusing more on maybe what's good and skillful in the world, rather than people, rather than what's not so skillful, not so good. And in our own practice, trying to promote that which is skillful and abandon that which is unskillful. So I'd like to offer these thoughts for you this evening.
อันธรรมยังธรรมกถาสาธุการังกถามาเส